Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. I am really disappointed and furious in many ways at how the nation is being exploited by some individuals. Let me say this from the onset. I think Chamisa and his MDC friends are corrupt, incompetent, and they're exploiting the weaknesses in our society. There is definitely a weakness there. The people are very ignorant, naive, and gullible, and they're exploiting it. Yes, he's not the only one. Zanu PF are doing the same thing. But I'm talking specifically here of Chamisa. One of the problems we have in our politics is that most of our people, and I've said the majority of them, are ignorant, naive, and gullible, and therefore then vulnerable to exploitation. One of their weaknesses is that they see our politics as binary. It's a choice between Nelson Chamisa and Mnangagwa, or Triple C and Zanu PF. Well, the world is not that simple. The truth of the matter is, our political situation is not binary at all. The political situation in Zimbabwe at present is one in which you are not choosing between Nelson Chamisa and Emerson Mnangagwa. The process, the electoral process, is rigged. Until that is fixed, you cannot say you've got a binary choice. So the primary purpose of the opposition in Zimbabwe is to implement the democratic reforms so that we could have a healthy and meaningful electoral process. There's no pretending that we can have a meaningful election until we fix that point. So when you're looking at the opposition, you're not choosing between the opposition and Zanu PF. You're choosing an opposition that is competent and will implement the reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. What we see in MDC Triple C is an opposition that has compromised itself. They've been on the political stage for the last 24 years, including the 5 during the GNU. They failed to implement even one token reform. Not because they didn't have the opportunity, they did. The primary purpose of the 2008 to 2013 GNU was to implement the democratic reforms. They failed to implement even one because Mugabe bribed them. with the trappings of high office, the ministerial limos, the very generous salaries and allowances. And for Morgan Changira himself, the US $4 million mansion in Highlands. And with that, they forgot about the reforms. They kicked reforms out of the window. They failed to implement even one token reform. And so for the ordinary people to think that they're going into an election to elect either Chamisa or Nangagwa is to miss the point completely. The elections in Zimbabwe have been all about let's implement the reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. If the opposition, the MDC/CCC, have failed to implement even one token reform in 24 years, including 5 in the GNU, then we need an alternative opposition leaders. Zanu PF will never reform itself out of office. That is a well-established fact. So we are not choosing between Zanu PF to implement reforms or MDC to implement reforms. We are choosing MDC for a specific purpose to implement reforms, and they failed to do so in the last 24 years, including 5 in the GNU. It is interesting to note here that there are some opposition leaders, notably Atham Tabara, who have admitted the primary purpose of the GNU was to implement reforms, and that they, the opposition, the MDC guys, took their eyes off the ball. What we have lacked here is an electorate that has been smart enough to understand what is going on here. That has been smart enough to know that MDC guys have indeed failed the nation. And the likes of Nelson Chamisa have exploited that weakness. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of the prodigal son. And it has got many lessons, and 3 of which are teaches us about sin, about greed, about arrogance, of the prodigal son. It also teaches us about humility when he realized that he had made a mistake, and repentance. And when he went to the Father, the third point, also teaches us about the Father's love and willingness to forgive a repentant sinner. I find Nelson Chamisa to be just a corrupt, incompetent, and an upstart who is exploiting the people, masquerading as a man of God. Is using the name of God, in my view, in vain. In one of his postings, which I've got on the screen there, he says, the source of all wisdom. And he says, wisdom is a gift from God. Very true. And he goes on to quote Proverbs 2, verse 6. For the Lord gives wisdom, from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. And he ends with his usual hashtag, God is in it. Well, this time last year, when the country was in the middle of the election fever, Chamisa came out and said repeatedly that I have plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. Hashtag, God is in it. We all know that Zanu PF blatantly rigged those elections. The SADC and the AU election observers confirmed that in no uncertain terms. So what was it that Chamisa said he had plugged? It turns out that he didn't even deploy election agencies at all the polling stations. A common sense thing, he didn't do so. And it turns out that he had been given the funds to do it. He pocketed the money. Here he is, once again, evoking the name of God, giving the impression that he is himself touched by God. Indeed, in one of his Twitters, he said he was touched by God. And therefore, then he's wise. I ask again, when he said he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes, was that wisdom from God? Or was he lying? I believe he was lying. I believe he was evoking the name of God in vain. He knows that we've got an electorate, many of whom are ignorant, naive, and very gullible. You evoke the name of God, and they will believe you. And he's exploiting that weakness. There is no doubt that Nelson Chamisa and his MDC Triple C friends have been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that they are flawed, knowing fully well that Zanu PF was rigging them, knowing fully well that by participating, they'll be giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But they've continued to participate out of greed. I've often shown on the screen this quotation from David Coulter's book. He was referring to the 2013 elections. He could not pretend not to see that the process was flawed. He could see it. He could see that it was illegal. He could also not pretend that the logical thing to do under those circumstances was to withdraw. What is the point of participating in an election process that you know is flawed? That you know by participating your own givings are not PF, the vote riggings are not PF legitimacy. But it tells us there why he could not withdraw. Why he and his MDC friends went ahead and participated in those elections. They feared that the other side would remain in the election and win the few seats that Zanu PF was offering as bait. When Chamisa last year was talking of I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, he was lying. He just wanted to con people to participate because winning those few gravy train seats depended on him conning millions of ordinary Zimbabweans to participate in those flawed elections. How else would Zanu PF get legitimacy? And he has got the audacity to evoke the name of God. Hashtag God is in it. No, God is not in that. How could God be in a scheme of greed? This was pure and simple greed. The opposition were participating in these elections out of greed. Period. The millions of ordinary Zimbabweans who participated in those elections gave the process credibility, as David Coulter admits there, and gave Zanu PF legitimacy. And thus perpetuating the dictatorship, the very root cause of the tragic human suffering in the country. How could God be in it? How could God be in any way in a scheme that is causing such tragic human suffering? God was not in it. Chamisa was just lying. What is more worrying is that Chamisa is regrouping. He'll be participating in the 2028 elections. And he will be telling the people a similar lie to his hashtag, God is in it, I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. And the signs are those 2 million or so people who participated last year's elections will participate again. And thus perpetuate this Zanu PF dictatorship. I think this is the challenge that we've got to face. I think to allow people like Chamisa to abuse the ordinary people as often as they've done so is unforgivable. And to allow it to continue is totally unacceptable. I do not have anything against politicians, but at least they should come out as politicians and not hide behind the veil of religion, pretending they are representing God just because the people are ignorant, naive, and gullible. God was not in Chamisa's lie about plugging vote rigging loopholes. God was not in Chamisa and company hell bent, who were hell bent on participating in 2023 elections. God is not in his plans to participate in 2028 elections. It is only trying to hide his lie by pretending that God is in it. God is not in it. We need our people to open their eyes and see for themselves that they are being conned. I think the worst thing that can happen to Zimbabwe is for the country to be dragged into yet another flawed election in 2028 and people participating in their millions in those flawed elections. Because if people do that, I think SADC will find it again very difficult to deny Zanu PF legitimacy. Just as they found it difficult to deny Zanu PF political legitimacy last year. They haven't said why they accepted the damning SADC election observer mission report, but have decided to do nothing about it. My guess is it's because the opposition participated in those elections and millions of ordinary Zimbabweans voted, participated in those elections. Nearly 2 million voted for Chamisa according to the ZEC report results. And it is clear that millions in the diaspora cheered and applauded the process. because they too were conned by Chamisa into believing that he had plugged all the fortricking loopholes. Chamisa lied. And for Pete's sake, open your eyes. God was not in any of those lies. It is particularly disappointing that the millions or so, the millions in the diaspora, some of them with university education, highly qualified people in their own right, can be so gullible, naive, as to believe these lies. Chamisa lied in 2018 that he had stringent measures to stop Zanu PF freaking elections. And the millions in the diaspora believed him. He lied last year that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. And millions in the diaspora believed him. I'll be damned if those millions of highly qualified Zimbabweans in the diaspora or in Zimbabwe itself are going to be conned into believing yet another lie. If anyone is betraying Zimbabwe, it is those people, because they should know better. There's absolutely no excuse why they can be so naive and gullible. Chamisa is an ordinary mortal with a proven track record of being corrupt and incompetent. And why some people treat him as if he's an infallible demigod beggars belief. He claims to have the wisdom. Anyone can claim to have wisdom. He claims that he has been touched by God. Anyone can claim to have been touched by God. But when you claim something and it's proven that you were lying, I think it also proves that you were not touched by God as you claimed, that you are not as wise as you claimed. The number one task before the people of Zimbabwe today is to make sure that 2028, Chamisa does not con people with yet another lie that he can win rigged elections. Food for thought. Thank you very much for joining me today. I'll just let's show this comment from Henry. Every day is Sadak. But Sadak does not own Zimbabwe. For the love of God, come back and lead us, please. You know it all. Have all the answers. Come lead. Well, it's not Wilbert Mukore should lead. It's the people themselves. Because even if I could lead, I am mortal as well. If people are gullible, they're going still to be vulnerable to exploitation by people who are smart enough to exploit their weakness. The point really is not so much that one individual, it's the people themselves should be enlightened enough to make that choice. It cannot depend. A nation should never, I think this is one of the actually fallacies of our political system. It has created this impression that the people are totally helpless without the leader. No. Democracy is all about a government of the people, by the people, for the people. The people themselves are the ones who should have the power. And unless you are educated, knowledgeable, and diligent, you will have some smart aleck masquerade as the messenger of God himself. And if you are so naive and gullible, you believe him and land the nation where exactly where we find ourselves. I think the most important solution, the most important thing here is that the people themselves should open their eyes and their minds. And until we get to that point, I don't believe Zimbabwe will recover from this. Because let's not forget here that both Chamisa and Mnangagwa know that the electorate are weak, and therefore then they'll be fighting to make sure that the electorate are not educated, remain naive, gullible, and ignorant. So the fight is to educate the electorate and not to get just one leader who can answer all our questions, because I don't think anyone can answer all our questions. That is my opinion. Thank you very much, Andrew, again for your comment. But again, once again, I would say thank you very much for joining this discussion today, and hope to see you again today, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time on this platform. Have a good day.